Thanks, Candace. And if you don't mind, just enable my screen share. That would be outstanding. Um, Good morning, everyone. It's great to see some faces and some names here, and I'm excited that people are kind of stepping forward to learn about mentoring. I think this is a really important time for mentoring, and I'm excited to see people and organizations excited about it and implementing it again. So, my name is Leigh Ann Roberts, and hopefully, we can make this session as interactive as possible. And I really want to give you guys some nuggets, particularly for people that are considering being a mentor or implementing a mentoring program, whatever you call it, a resilience program, a colleague program, whatever you call it in your organization, because I do think now's the time. We need supportive relationships. We need soft accountability in a resilience kind of context. And I think mentoring programs and connections are a really sustainable, affordable, and efficient way to check a lot of those boxes. So, before we dive in, I'm wondering if a few of you might be willing to just unmute yourself and maybe say hello, and what was it about this topic that had you be interested in it?
I'll go. I'm Catherine Kuntz. I'm the head of a school, and so the mentoring of teachers and teachers mentoring teachers, and as part of the onboarding process, was what was interesting to me.
Oh, Catherine, thank you for being here, especially in the midst of all of the complexity that you and your colleagues are navigating right now. Thank you for your
Okay.
service. Really appreciate it. And I think this is a great resource for teachers to keep them supported right now. I've spoken with a lot of teachers, many of whom aren't feeling supported by maybe traditional places where that support has come from. So, really equipping them with some structure to build that community. Thank you for being here. Anybody else? I'm going to share a screen. I promise not to talk the whole time, but let's see here. Um, I love the idea of us being able to kind of see each other's faces at the same time, and as well as looking at slides. So I'm going to just pull us over here. So let's go ahead and move into the slides. And Candace introduced me. I come to this conversation through the practice of law. Actually, I practiced law for 20 years and was a workplace mediator. I still am a workplace mediator. And I found that I really enjoyed the work of advising leaders, coaching leaders before the lawsuit happened. That's really where my passion was. And it really put me down a path of adult learning, executive development, professional development, as well as all of these great topics around soft skill development, like emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. And so, probably my biggest credential for this conversation is that I have been mentored and continue to be mentored by some incredible people. And I think if you have been mentored, you want to mentor other people. It just feels right to give back in that way. And so this is a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. I love this quote. I like to start any conversation with a quote. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. So much of what has been poured into me was hard learned, and hard won by professionals and people that came before me. So I really like to acknowledge that, and I think the same could be said for most of us. I'm big into storytelling. So, part of the reason I like to start with a little bit of storytelling is that our brains are really organized around story. We retain story in a different way. And so, going all the way back to like Greek mythology, the word mentor came from this story. Some of you've probably heard Odysseus, or often called in Latin Ulysses, in Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad. He was kind of the hero of the story. Well, when he went off to fight the Trojan War, he left the care of his son um, with a person called Mentorcius. And so that's actually where the name came from. And as that mythology would have it, the goddess Athena, I love that there's a goddess in this conversation. The goddess Athena came in through Mentorcius and actually mentored Ulysses, his son. He was having some internal concerns about his father, his safety. He was having some intuitive drive about going and checking on him and sending him support. He was having trouble with the decision making around that. And Athena came through this mentor and said, "What you're thinking is correct. You need to go and you need to see about this. Don't listen to these other people around you. They kind of want your dad out of the picture." And so I actually think that that is a very telling story. It tells us about kind of the role of a mentor, which is to encourage, to lift up the decision making, to influence the decision making where there is doubt, and to support that leader, that individual in following their own discernment. Okay. I'm doing something new with the slides here. So, and I also think that this is let's see. There are lots of current trends. We don't have to go all the way to Greek mythology. There are, within the last 10 years, 700 Fortune 500 companies that have stepped forward with mentoring programs. And they're doing this because it's really good business. Organizations have figured out if people have a connection at work, they stay. It's one of the biggest deciders around whether people take another position, often over benefits and pay. There are lots of different reasons, and we're going to talk about some of the benefits of mentoring programs, but certainly we can see in kind of today's culture, this is a tool that organizations are doing to build loyalty, increase productivity, job satisfaction. And we see it with a lot of different professions. Catherine, I don't know if this is true for teachers, but in professions like accountants and with lawyers, and I think also with some teachers groups, there is actually a requirement for a bit of mentoring. Yeah. And as a coach, part of our training is we have to be mentored by a mentor coach. And I get to serve as a mentor coach now, and they're my favorite kind of coaching engagements. And even in Tennessee, we are seeing Tennessee state government has really weaved mentoring into all of its leadership offerings, and I think it's really what I hear in terms of feedback from people that go through those programs, those mentoring relationships, is really where they build connections, and that's really probably the most sustainable structure apart from the learning that comes out of that. So I know you guys probably recognize this gentleman on the left here, Warren Buffett, one of the richest men alive. You know, certainly how our society would say this is a successful person. A lot of people don't know about his story, that he was mentored by a gentleman by the name of Bill Graham while he was at university, Columbia University. He was uh, one of his best students, one of the only students that ever got an A plus. And you know, when he got out of school, Warren Buffett got out of school. Bill Bill Graham's firm was not hiring Jewish people, and he really advocated for Warren Buffett to have a role at that firm and was a game changer, a disruptor, and really influenced his decision making throughout Warren Buffett's life. Warren Buffett talks about Graham's book, The Intelligent Advisor, as being the best book ever written on investing. So, very close relationship with Warren Buffett and his mentor. So much so that even later in life, Warren Buffett purchased a now much better known small insurance company, Geico. And so we start to see in some of these stories that there is a reciprocal nature to these mentoring relationships. And Warren Buffett did pay it forward. The lady in the upper right hand, you may not recognize, but her name is Katharine Graham. She is the woman that ran the Washington Post after the untimely death of her husband, and actually shepherded that paper through the Watergate crisis for our country. And really, the Washington Post was critical in the uncovering of that scandal, and holding our government accountable. Warren Buffett began investing in the Washington Post, and Katharine Graham, like any good business leader, reached out to him to clarify his intentions. There have been hostile takeovers, but what happened over that lunch is they became very close friends. He mentored her as she stepped into the role of running this publication. And he even wrote her obituary when she died, saying that she should have been given the Pulitzer Prize for her service. And so I love these connections that we see in modern culture. Most people recognize this guy, Phil Jackson. He mentored a pretty famous basketball player that most of us want to grow up and be like, Michael Jordan. But what most people don't know, or some people don't know about Michael Jordan, is that he didn't necessarily flourish in his career till he had Phil Jackson as a mentor. The From what I've understand and have read in excerpts from Michael Jordan's biography, that he was removed from his high school basketball team for lack of skill, which seems amazing at this point to think about. But it was really when he began playing for Phil Jackson that he began to flourish. And he amassed 6 NBA titles and is literally, or was literally, the most decorated NBA player. And I think it's really important to even go back even a little bit further and think, you know, who influenced Phil Jackson. Some people recognize this guy, Red Holtzman, and this was Phil Jackson's coach, and so we can kind of start seeing some lineage here. I love it. And when Phil Jackson was injured playing for the Celtics, he sat on the bench and Red Holtzman poured into him, and he said, "Look, Phil, you see the game in a way that a lot of players don't see it. I think you need to be a coach." And Phil Holtzman was a very successful coach in his own right, coaching the New York Knicks, and was entered into the Basketball Hall of Fame and top 10 coaches in NBA history. So, really influential in Phil Jackson's life. And I just love seeing this mentoring pouring forward, especially in kind of a coaching context. And the last story I kind of want to tell is about this lady, and of course, most people on the planet recognize Mother Teresa, but a lot of people don't know that she really struggled in her faith. In the last part of her life, and she wrote letters with her mentor, uh, Father Michael Vanderpeet, and those letters have been published. And she really shared with him like her dark night of the soul. And I don't know if you've had one of those or lived through a period like that, but she talked about her faith being very dry, and her motivation for service really being in a low place. And it was through this letter sharing of letters that she was able to do everything that she did to create orphanages and really be one of the most influential people in known history. So we've got some examples for a mentoring relationship. So let's talk about a definition. This is how I define it. A mentoring relationship is an intentional commitment to a mutually beneficial relationship, mutually beneficial, between two or more participants for the purpose of inspiring, influencing, guiding, enriching, and strengthening the skills and decision making abilities of both participants. This is really kind of a basic framework. If you are considering a program like this in and of itself is a great framework in terms of expectation setting, even going into a one-on-one relationship. So I do think it's important to recognize that being a mentor does not mean being a guru. I think this is important. In the past, I think how mentors have been, held is like you've got to come in and you've got to know all the answers and give all the answers. And I don't think that's really what sustainable mentoring looks like. It's much more about supporting the decision making of the mentee, building on the strengths that they are bringing to the relationship. And when you think about the different roles of a mentor, they can be very varied. So really some coaching, some consulting, there's teaching involved. There's a lot of reflection in terms of, how people are showing up, giving them feedback, giving them coaching, really being that trusted advisor for them. Most of the time when I have been in a mentoring relationship on the receiving end or the giving end, there are themes to what people are working on. And Catherine, you may see that this is some of what your teachers are really looking for. So, how do we manage the client? How do we manage parents? How are we supporting young people right now? I am on a lot of private teacher association Facebook groups, and I love seeing the group mentoring that happens in those spaces, supporting them, especially young people right now, where attending to their nervous systems and their wellness is so important. But also there are other topics around like how do I lead effective meetings, needing feedback on ethical questions. We talked about influencing decision making and just practice class management, organization management, time management. Dealing with issues around image or influence. This is actually one that I see a lot in the nonprofit sector, in the public sector. A lot of the professionals that step forward into this mission based work just are less concerned with influence, building influence strategies, but this is a core competency of today's professionals. You've got to get people to be able to listen to you before you can actually influence them. So, also goal setting, performance change, conflict management. That's a big one that leaders struggle with and take up a lot of time. Being a workplace mediator, this is a lot of the kinds of conversations that I'm coming into, issues around communication, change management. So when people think about the role of a mentee, and Candace, if you'll help me manage the any comments since I'm sharing slides, I want to make sure we capture questions. Thank you.
Yep, I got you.
Perfect. So, in terms of views of mentees, people kind of come in with different mental models around this. And I think that's important to kind of know as you're beginning to set expectations. So, sometimes people think of this person as their protege, or an emerging leader that they're kind of bringing up through the ranks. And then some people have other impressions, a closer, more intimate connection, friend, even kind of their mini me. I've heard that before, or even treating a mentee as their intern. And so again, this is around setting expectations. That's not the highest and best use of a mentoring relationship, but sometimes that is what happens when we're not intentional. And just addressing this last one, sometimes resistance in the workplace around having a mentee is this concern that they are going to be replaced by their mentee. And so these are some mental models to pay attention to when you're having a conversation both with mentees and mentors about participating in a program like this. So breaking down that definition, I want to go through some of these components. And again, this is just a high level overview. Whenever I go into organizations to help them set up mentoring programs, we dive deeper on these, but you'll get an understanding of each of these kinds of elements in the overview today. So first and foremost, the intentional commitment. Intentionality is incredibly important. It's probably the secret sauce of a mentoring program. And so think about in terms of, intentionality, you cannot get to a good place in a bad way. What you put into this process is what people are going to get out of this process. So let's really support people around intentionality. Let's control what we can control right now on the planet and set people up for success. So in terms of being intentional, why is this important? It really makes a difference. And for example, frequency really matters in terms of a mentoring relationship. The statistics have been very clear that when mentors and mentees meet a handful of times a year or even just quarterly, there's a 36% improvement of productivity and general development reported by the mentee. But when the frequency increases to a monthly cadence, the impact goes up to 86%. So frequency really does matter in a mentoring relationship, and you really want to set expectations or invite the mentor and the mentee to set expectations around frequency at the very beginning of the relationship. In terms of best results, I encourage people to meet at the beginning and carve out potentially 90 minutes to 2 hour slot so that they can develop some goals together, build some trust, and create their container. And then meet monthly, whether that's virtually, via telephone, for at least a commitment of 6 months. And so I'm really drawing on some of the best practices that have shown up in studies on mentoring programs. And this can also include telephone calls and emails in between meetings. But again, frequency matters. I also think it's important at the beginning of the relationship to have a commitment, not only to frequency, but kind of some general guidelines, container, rules, confidentiality. So develop some commitment. What are we committing to in this relationship? And I want to just tell a brief story about why commitment is so important in terms of how kind of humans think and organize themselves. Some of you have probably heard of the Milgram experiment. In short, there were on a college campus, there was an ad sent out inviting people for pay to participate in a scientific study. Those individuals were invited in, given their payment by a person with a clipboard and a person with a white lab coat, and they were told that the nature of the experiment was very simple. When they heard a buzzer, that they were to push this shiny red button. And that was the experiment. When they heard the button, when they heard the buzzer, they pressed the button. And they asked if the person had any questions about the experiment. When they were clear on the experiment, they asked for their commitment to push the button when they heard the buzzer. And so then the person checked a box on their clipboard and said that they were going outside of the room to check on other participants, that they should begin, and they would be back to check on them in a bit. The buzzer went off, the person pushed the button. The buzzer went off, the person pushed the button. And this went on for a couple of minutes before a screen lifted. And on the other side of kind of the one-way glass was an elderly person and sitting in a chair, and it appeared that every single time the person pushed the button, that elderly person received an electric shock. And so the experiment became who continued to push the button. I think they even went so far as to like put burnt hair smell like wafting through the vent. They tried to make this as real as possible for people. And so the question is, who continued to push the button? And sorry to say, but most of the participants continued to push the button. The only group of people, I don't know if you guys want to guess, who did not push the button, but it was millennials. Millennials, I know, that big smile, I love it. Yes. So millennials did not push the button. They don't care who you are. And so it goes to show that but human nature, this thing around commitment, especially commitment to an authority figure, has a tremendous sway on people. They will even do horrible things. Not millennials. They will only do it if they believe in it, and we should thank them for that. You know, millennials get a hard rap in the workplace, but they will not electrocute elderly people. They don't care who asked them to. And so we should honor them for that and follow their leadership. But I tell you this story to say that we really have to harness the power of commitment, not leave this to chance. get both people to make a commitment to the container of the mentoring relationship if we really want to see this thing flourish and grow. Let's use this power for good and control what we can control. So, the second piece I want to talk about is that it really should be a mutually beneficial relationship. I think that this is important. And I think it's actually really true. It's not just beneficial for the mentees, but it's also very, very beneficial for the mentors and the organization itself. And so for some of you, you have to kind of go back into your organizations and influence up about why this is a good idea. And so here's some talking points that may support you with each of those audiences. We'll start with the mentees. I think they are the most, let me see here. Yeah. They are the most, this is the most intuitive kind of body of benefits. And so the research is actually really, really clear that people that have a mentor have much higher promotion rates. They have much higher reported job satisfaction, mental well-being. And I think this is really important in this hybrid workspace. If people aren't happy, they will find a new place to work. If they don't feel connected, if they don't feel satisfied, it has also been shown to lower job stress and workplace conflict. And oh my gosh, the statistic is that 64% of a manager or minister's time is spent dealing with conflict. So this is actually, nobody has time for that. I mean, some conflict is good. I mean, in terms of improving and disrupting systems that need to be changed and improved. But let's, again, control what we can control and keep people in a good working space. The research is also really clear that mentees tend to out earn in terms of salary non-mentored employees. So, I mean, this in of itself is a strong piece of influence to want to have a mentor. And certainly improvement in problem solving, EQ kinds of issues, strengthening their work ethic, and maybe even one of the most important is that when you walk into an organization, we don't always see these like unwritten landmines. And so if you've got a mentor, they tell you where to step, who's important, in terms of like getting your paycheck. And yeah, so this is really, really important information that's nowhere in the handbook, and really critical. In terms of organizations, I've mentioned before that where there are mentoring programs, there's 67% increase in retention of your workforce. And if you don't know how much turnover costs, in the 90s, it was $40,000 for every time a nurse left an organization. If you did not know this when you woke up this morning, feel very good about yourself and know that it takes 1.5 to 2 times your salary to replace you if you are a trained professional. So the cost of turnover is no joke. Statistics go on to say that 75% of the organizations that had mentoring programs saw improved performance. I think there is a tremendous benefit to having mentoring programs to support diversity, inclusion, and equity work. I think this is how you get many more internal hires, internal promotions, and this is also how leaders have greater cognitive diversity. By being in relationship with people that have different lived experience, their thinking expands. And I think that is important for a lot of these different reasons that you see here. And, when people leave the workplace, they don't just take themselves with them. They often leave with intellectual property, they go to competitors. So there are just a lot of business reasons, brand reasons to invest in mentoring programs. I think the least intuitive kind of group of people that benefits is the mentors, but the research is really clear that people that are mentors have a greater level of satisfaction in their work. There's something about connecting with those mentoring stories in your career that represences your passion in your work. It has a tremendous impact on resilience. I also think that this is some of the absolute best management training that people can receive. If you have someone that comes to you in your organization and they say, I want to be promoted to manager, I encourage you to say to them, I want to see you in some mentoring relationships. I want to support you around that, give you time around that. That is really how you're going to develop that skill. And certainly I'll say for me, I have referred business to my mentors, and I have had a tremendous amount of work referred to me by my mentees, and they become champions for the organizations and causes that are meaningful to me often. And I think that that is a really, really big benefit. So part of what I'm pointing at here is that mentoring is a two-way street. It needs to be a two-way street. There's something to be learned for everyone involved in the relationship. There's a lot of research coming out of India about how a lot of manufacturing plants and a lot of companies used reverse mentoring. So really using the younger part of the workforce to mentor the older part of the workforce, particularly around technology. There were some cultural pieces that got in the way around that, but with some intentionality, they found that this was an incredible boon to every part of their organization. So I think that this is really important that it goes both ways. And I hope that you will consider when you leave here mentoring others and also thanking the people that have mentored you. It's just a good reminder. I want to talk a little bit about the relationship, the mentoring relationship. I think you've got to put work into it. It has to be intentional, and really work on building trust. Now, I highlight this gentleman, Bob Cialdini. He talks a lot about influence, and so if influence is one of the things that you're working on, his book on influence is probably the most well known. And he's got several principles, several rules of influence that he has discovered that is really true of just like humans in general. So things, and you can hear it in all of our advertising. So 5 out of 6 dentists recommend this toothpaste. Well, I want that toothpaste, right? Or call now, supplies are limited. Oh gosh, operators are standing by. There's all this language that capitalism has used and harnessed. And so one of the rules that Bob Cialdini talks about is the rule of reciprocity. When someone does something for us, we want to do something for them. So a simple example of this is if you've ever gone to your mailbox at the end of the year and received a Christmas or holiday card, and you run inside and you write one to that person. I know I've done it. And so this is the rule of reciprocity at work. When someone does something for us, we do it for them. So how do we harness this in a mentoring relationship? The simple answer is, if we want someone to be coachable, if we want them to open up and be vulnerable and talk about what they're working on, we have to be vulnerable. I actually really love, let me see if I've got it here. Yeah, this great quote by Michael Jordan. You know, I love Michael Jordan. He talks about, this is my favorite quote by him. It says, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to make the game-winning shot and missed. I have failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." I think that this is actually a really important concept, because so many of us have been trained not to be vulnerable, not to talk about our failures. And the vast majority of really potent mentoring stories really have to do with us being vulnerable and sharing what we have learned. So, again, I'm a big fan of reciprocal sharing here. All right. Let's see. Next slide. So, how do I build trust intentionally? I'm going to give you the secret sauce right here. I've already talked about it earlier. We build trust very intentionally by telling stories. That is the secret sauce of building trust. And I do think, I like to quote like one of the greatest philosophers of our time, Chris Rock. He talks about, when we meet people, we don't meet their true self, we meet their representative self. And so we're all kind of moving through the world with these masks on, now literal masks, but professional masks. And so if we want people to kind of drop below the mask and talk about what they're really struggling with and what they're working on, we really have to tell those stories. When we tell stories about our lives, there is always a common takeaway. And the common takeaway is that we are more alike than we are different. And the ways that we're different make us stronger, not weaker. That is always the insight that people have when they stay in relationship and tell those stories. And this is important. I'm going back to Bob Cialdini. Bob Cialdini talks about the that there is a rule of influence that says that we trust people that we view as like us, because we hold ourselves to be trustworthy. And if you're like me, you must be trustworthy too. So again, this storytelling is so critical in terms of putting water in the pool intentionally in these relationships. So I also think that guidelines are very important. Google spent a lot of money figuring out what made their best teams and the best containers for their kind of learning communities. And they did find that behavioral norms, guidelines is what I call them in my work, are the secret sauce for that. Now, in the body of work that I participate in, a group facilitation model that is really rooted in Native American, indigenous forms of like community building, restorative justice, The practitioners of this model have facilitated these conversations all over the planet and asked people, what do you need to feel psychologically safe to drop into this relationship? What do you need to open up and to be vulnerable and to get feedback and to receive that feedback and to integrate it? And around the world, most people ask for the same thing. So, respect, honesty, humility, sharing, forgiveness, courage, empathy, and trust, and even things like confidentiality, presence, not having your device on the table. So, building on a set of guidelines, having the people participating in the mentoring relationship create some container for their conversation in that initial conversation that they commit to and that they practice together. I think it's really important to talk about trust building and guidelines because it is really predictable that there can be challenges in mentoring relationships. There can be manipulative behavior. There is a position of trust here. There can be miscommunication. There can be complications around schedules, childcare. There's a lot of flexibility and adaptability that is required. This relationship will get tried and tested. There can be a mismatch of personalities, a mismatch of goals, and unmet expectations. So, building this container is really important. And prevent the kinds of things that will happen. And so, Catherine, if your organization decided to do a mentoring program, you would want to help them build some guidelines and even suggest a few guidelines, like nobody's investing in anybody else's candle making business. Like, let's leave money out of this. Let's not complicate it with a dual relationship. That stuff is super predictable. When people are encouraging and supporting each other, the lines get blurred. So be intentional about that, given your audience and the people that you're working with. When I go into organizations, I encourage people to have a mentoring agreement or contract. And I have a template around that I use with my clients. I encourage you to support your team by giving them some kind of a tool like that supports their commitment. Now, in terms of this, I know we start talking about contract and agreement. People are like, oh, this is starting to feel a little formal. So we are kind of like looking for that just right place. So the just formal enough that it's providing some structure, it's supporting the frequency, we're harnessing that power of commitment, but also flexible enough that people can create the kind of relationship that they need. So you do need to use your own discernment and intuition around finding that place, that level of formality that's just right for your organization. If you have a mentor that is, moving into this process, have a conversation with them just around, their device usage, how they're going to protect the time. This sends a very strong signal. And be cognizant that people that you're inviting into this space really do need to have a level of emotional intelligence. They are representing your organization and your leadership. So be mindful about that. Couple of last points and we'll begin to close. So I do think that mentoring can take place in a group setting. I'm seeing more and more group mentoring, and there are even some generations and groups of folks that prefer a group setting. So think about that, particularly if you have a limited number of mentors and a finite amount of time. We can get creative here and really expand the impact of those conversations. And last but certainly not least, the purpose of this needs to be clear at the beginning of the engagement to inspire, influence, guide, and develop skills and decision making abilities. You want to make sure that you explore a few distinctions. I strongly encourage mentors to use a coaching model. So, not giving the answers like a consultant would. The mentor is not always going to be around to answer questions. The job of the mentor is to influence the decision making capacity of the mentee so that the next time they're making a decision, they're thinking through the kinds of things that the mentor and the mentee have talked about. And I will say, sometimes there is a common misconception that a mentor is going to be the person that advocates for the mentee internally for raises and promotions and projects. And so I do think, so we call that a sponsor in the business, like that, someone that's advocating for you internally. If a mentee goes into a relationship with a mentor thinking they're getting a sponsor, there's going to be conflict. And so you want to be really clear about these roles on the front end. So I hope that you have a few nuggets today to start a successful relationship or program. Think about developing your to-do list as you start this conversation. Think about your agenda. How will you introduce yourself to each other? How will you support some storytelling? I love questions like, what brought you to this work? What keeps you in this work? Tell me about a mentor, or Catherine, in your setting, tell me about a teacher that had a positive influence on your life so that you can really use your creativity here. And then move into, once you've really done some being together, you can move into the doing together and complete your mentoring agreement, your ground rules. Always sprinkle in stories. We're never done trust building. It should be part of every conversation. And then move into goal setting. Of course, you guys know all about SMART goals, so I encourage you to provide that structure for the people that you're working with. And always create space to celebrate the people that are participating in this. I think we are a culture that does a lot of thinking and a lot of doing, and sometimes we reflect on it, but let's celebrate the people that participate in this process. So think about taking this back out into your world, mentoring people, even if it's just starting little feedback loops in your organization. What's just one thing that I could be doing better? Begin creating these loops where people are mentoring each other, even on the fly. Remember that you have giants that you are standing on the shoulders of when it comes to mentoring. You don't have to be a guru. And if you have any questions about this, I love this topic. I hope that you'll reach out. And thank you, each of you, for showing up for this conversation. I just think it's really important right now. Thanks. And Candace, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Leigh Ann. Thank you so much for being here with us, for sharing that, all of that great, lots of nuggets of great information you've shared. It's 11 o'clock. I'm going to post two things in the chat real quick. If anybody has any like last minute questions for Leigh Ann.
Leigh Ann, are we able to get your slides or the notes from your slides?
I think that the slides will be recorded as part
Okay.
of the a part of the recording, so you should be able to see those.
Just not, yeah, okay. Just to grab them. Okay.
Yep, I will send the recording to each of you in addition to the folks that registered that weren't able to make it. I put two links in here, one for our virtual self-care summit that's in a couple of weeks that I mentioned at the beginning. Dr. Koontz, I know that y'all already have your group signed up, which is great. I also put a link for a little feedback survey. It takes 2 or 3 minutes. So those of you that are on the call, if you have a couple minutes to fill that out, that would be great. Sheila, you'll recognize it because we, with permission, adapted our feedback survey from CNM's feedback survey. So if you get in there and you're like, I know these questions, thank you, CNM, for sharing your survey questions with us. Alejandrina, you go by Alex, is that right? Maybe you don't have your microphone on. Anyway, I just want to thank you for joining us. I think your nonprofit is signed up for the Self-Care Summit too, so hopefully we'll see you in September. And Rita, glad to have you as well.
And Candace, can I just say one thing about Abby's upcoming session on the Enneagram?
Great.
So for those of you that are considering doing a mentoring relationship or a mentoring program using an assessment like the Enneagram or DISC or True Colors or Strengths Finder is a potent tool to really drive that mentoring relationship home. So I highly recommend Abby's upcoming session.
Yeah, thanks for that plug. It's next
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, what's that?
I say thank you very much. This is Alejandrina. I had hard time getting my microphone on.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
All right, I will send the recording to you all. Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.